we'd like to welcome great Gydush. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. From Freenom, who will share with us his knowledge around running ML workflows from notebooks. So, welcome, Greg. And I don't know if before your presentation you wanted to briefly share with us about your background and probably something you enjoy doing outside work will be.
For sure. Yeah, my presentation will cover that. So if you don't mind letting me drive. And it's Greg Gydush, by the way. You were pretty close. It's a hard name to pronounce. It's also made up. So, there's no real pronunciation, but it's fine. So yeah, just want to say hello to the community. My name is Greg Gydush, and yeah, I've been a long time lurker of this meeting and avid user of Flyte for the past couple of years, but it's my first time presenting at this forum. So I'm really excited to be here and appreciate the time. And yeah, in a couple minutes, we'll talk a little bit about providing workflow interfaces with Pydantic. Can you see the slides right now? All good? Great.
Yep.
But before we get into the weeds with that, I definitely want to introduce myself, talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing at Freenome for context and how that relates to Flyte. So yeah, we'll do some introductions. I'll tell you a little bit about Freenome. We can talk about improving workflow discovery, and then there should be plenty of time for questions, but feel free to interrupt throughout. We can always chat about the content being presented. So just about me, I am a senior bioinformatics research engineer. My background is in biomedical engineering and material science, but I've done a lot of molecular biology and assay development, both in undergrad and professionally. But I transitioned to more of the bioinformatics side because I really like handling the data that's generated in the lab. And also I've done some full stack software engineering. I'm a flight enthusiast. I tell all my friends about it, and my family too, flight to the moon. But I'm also an aspiring contributor, so I'd like to contribute more to this project because, yeah, I'd love to see it succeed and think the team has done phenomenal work so far. Outside of work, I do like coding for fun. I like following biotech. I really like farming and sustainable farming, bikes and board sports. So if y'all surf or snowboard or skateboard or anything with a board. I'm surprised I'm not on an Indo board right now, the balance board that I usually take for meetings, but thought maybe not for this one. But yeah, any board sport, really love. Great. So now we can talk a little bit about Freenome, which is a place that I've been working for I'm coming up on my 3-year anniversary, so it feels like forever, pretty crazy. But yeah, Freenome was founded in 2014 with the goal to create tools that empower everyone to prevent, detect, and treat their disease. So since 2014, we've actually grown from the original founders to a team of over 500, and we'll soon hit the 600 mark, which we're really excited about. So this 600 is, a large group of people comprised of, cross-collaborative individuals spanning automation, clinical development, engineering, bioinformatics, molecular biology, assay development. There's just a ton of teams working at Freenome, but we all share this common goal, which is to develop next-generation blood tests to detect cancer in its earliest stages when patients are most likely to be cured. So cancer is incredibly complex. So Freenome's approach involves creating cancer-specific blood tests to try and narrow that complexity. The first of which will be a colorectal cancer screening product. So colorectal cancer is actually the 3rd leading cause of cancer deaths in the United States, taking over 52,000 lives estimated for 2023. And early detection technology is improving rapidly, and if you catch colorectal cancer early, it actually has a 91% survival rate. So really great if you catch it early. For later stages, that survival rate plummets. So we really think that early detection is really the key to fighting colorectal cancer. And it is recommended that everyone over the age of 45 get routine screening for colorectal cancer. But despite the growth of screening methodologies that have come to market in recent years, many eligible patients are not actually getting screened, where screening rates are only 59% in the United States. And there are a variety of reasons for this, but current screening methods often involve things like colonoscopies or take-home stool tests. And not many people want colonoscopies, and not many people actually send back their stool test after receiving it, because it is kind of a fun process to do at home that may not be fun for everyone. So yeah, what's been shown though is that folks that may be less open to colonoscopies or the stool test, they may be more open to routine blood screening, where 2 out of 3 people who either have not been screened or were inconsistent with screenings would actually prefer a blood-based screening option. And that's also clear just by the percentage of patients enrolled in colorectal cancer research, where the majority of patients consent to venipuncture or a blood draw compared to colonoscopy, as it's far less invasive for the patient. So Freenome is working hard to try to get our products into the hands of millions of patients around the world so that we can dramatically change colorectal mortality rates, and hopefully colorectal cancer will be a thing of the past in the next couple of years. So along with the science and engineering expertise needed to build this product, having key opinion leaders informing policy is equally important. So Freenome was recently at the White House just last month to collaborate with public and private partners as part of the Cancer Moonshot Initiative reignited by Biden. And we're consistently part of the conversation on improving screening methodologies from a policy standpoint. So yeah, that's just a brief, in a nutshell, what Freenome is working on, but we're doing a ton of other things, and we definitely don't have time to dive into everything. But yeah, I kind of want to focus the rest of the talk, giving you like a sneak peek into some of the problems that we're trying to solve on the research platform team at Freenome, where we support over 100 scientists across a range of fields. And Jeev, who's actually on the call now, was just in the chat, I think I saw. He gave an excellent talk at a previous community meeting where he describes Freenome's decision to use Flyte and how we use it. So definitely check out that talk on the Union AI homepage. I think it's still there. So yeah, that's Freenome, that's me. And now we can go into the dreaded demo time where we're going to talk about improving workflow discovery. So wish me luck. But yeah, at Freenome, we just have a lot of Flyte projects where we have over 10 Flyte projects and hundreds of tasks and workflows used across our teams. So with this massive adoption of Flyte, we want to make sure that all teams can easily see what has already been created and really encourage both task and workflow use and reuse. We just want to prevent people from reinventing the wheel if the wheel has already been invented. So we expose Flyte also to many scientists that aren't trained in software engineering, and we really want to make it seamless to add to their existing flow as possible and try to prevent unnecessary context switching. So most of our users are using Jupyter notebooks as their standard computation environment. So I thought I'd put together, a demo showing how you can launch and retrieve workflows interactively in notebooks. And like I said, I think there should be plenty of time for questions. We're at the 10-minute mark. I think the demo will probably take another 10 minutes. So feel free to, ask questions throughout. So I'm just going to stop share for a sec and get over to the demo. Great. So sweet. Can you all see this? This is coming through?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about providing a workflow interface, praying for the demo gods. Thank you, Anuj. Where I wanted to, get this nice marriage of Flyte and Pydantic, because if you haven't used Pydantic before, it's an amazing data validation library. And I thought I could combine Flyte workflow interfaces with Pydantic to give a really nice UX. So I did mention that at Freenome, we have a ton of projects. a ton of workflows. Scientists use these little Jupyter notebooks, which is this environment that I'm in. So what I really wanted was a way for users to easily see workflows and tasks from notebooks and easily run them. So this demo is going to show how to access and launch Flyte workflows from a notebook. It's going to show validating of inputs prior to launching the workflow, both how I do it here and kind of comparing that with the Flyte remote experience, which is honestly my goal to get some of this into Flyte remote. So someday maybe we can get there. And then I'll show validation of custom types and some of the caveats of using this system that we've identified so far. So right now I have this repository, which I'm happy to share the code for this repository at some point, but I've made this Pydantic demo and it has a function get registered workflows. And what this will do is it'll query Flyte with a given project and domain. Is the font size okay? Can you all read this? It's all right? Cool.
I think it's fine.
So it has project and domain. We also provide, filters, which is like a Flyte kit, filter concept. So if you really want to filter it, there's also a way to sort it by something different if you don't, but by default, it just sorts by the latest created workflows. There's also like a max workflows to fetch because if you have thousands on thousands of workflows, oftentimes you only need the latest versions of them. So we limit that. So I can show you what this looks like. It doesn't take any time at all because Flyte remote is really fast. But what this did was make a call to Flyte remote for the project and domain that I have actually in a local sandbox over here. So this is Flyte sandbox, domain is main. So it just fetched all the workflows that are registered there. And then what I can do is select one of these, and I can show you what's nice about Jupyter Notebooks is you have this tab to complete. So you can easily, just cycle through all of the workflows that are registered to this given project and domain. And you can easily just select one of those to grab it, and it'll tell you the current version that it fetched, which I've done down here. But I've also, created a few other versions of this compute square workflow. So you can see we have another version registered with an old interface that I'll use in a second to kind of show you what this looks like. So on top of this workflow object, there's a load method, which loads a Pydantic workflow model, which is something that I've created for a given workflow. We'll get to that in a second, but you can specify a version, which is a registered workflow version. And by default, it will just take the latest registered version, because that's often kind of what folks will be using, especially if you have, dev and production domains. So this load function will query Flyte remote, grab the interface of the workflow and some of the doc strings that are associated on Flyte remote, or I mean Flyte admin, but using Flyte remote. And it'll transform that interface into a Pydantic interface where you can almost use a Flyte workflow as a Python function or a Python object. So I'll show that here because it's kind of a lot to take in, but I have this compute square workflow, which I had mentioned up here. I'm loading it, calling .load, and now I have this Pydantic workflow model instance where this represents the compute square workflow that's on remote. And so you can see I have this little doc string to execute this workflow on Flyte, provide the required arguments to execute, which takes all the parameters of Flyte remote execute. So if you want to have an execution name or something like that, you can do whatever you want. And then what's nice about this is when it fetches from Flyte remote, I can fetch all the parameters to the workflow and their doc strings. So I have this compute square, and now you can almost just use this like a Python function, except all the work is going to happen with remote. So I'll show you what the validation looks like, because I think Pydantic is where this really shines, because since this is a Pydantic model, it knows all of the arguments that are required by this workflow. We can see this workflow just takes value expressed as integer. So it errors and it tells you kind of exactly what's going on here. Like we're saying field is required, and And then I can try and do something, you know, that's obviously not an integer, and it'll say like the value is not a valid integer. So it just gives like really nice informative workflow or validation errors. So that's kind of how the validation works. And then, you know, if you actually provide it something that's legit, it'll, you know, succeed. And that's where you can call execute on this to actually execute the workflow. But before we do that, I kind of want to show kind of the same thing, but on Flyte Remote. And this is where I think we could try to improve Flyte Remote to kind of have the same level of like validation error messages. So I'm going to run pretty much the same thing using Flyte Remote. And you can see if we provide no inputs, which here I'll show you just one more time here. If I do value or just this, it tells you that the field is required, which is nice for value. Versus down here, we just get a you know, Flyte invalid input execution, and you may have to like read the trace back to figure out like expected inputs value is missing. So like we could definitely make this a little like cleaner with Pydantic, like less of a trace back. So it's like quickly easy to find exactly what's wrong with the workflow. So I'm just gonna comment this out to keep this stuff clean. And now I can show you when you want to execute this, you can just execute this right on Flyte. So I do have the local sandbox over here, and everything's set up for running on Flyte. So I can just, you know, say execution name is it's demo time. Let's see. Oh, okay. I have an invalid input, so we're good here. Wait, you know, one sec. Let me actually. I think the execution name I may not have actually figured out. My bad. But we can see we're running this on Flyte with execute, and we can always go over to the console here where we can see, you know, this is queuing up. It's getting ready to run. And then I have, you know, some progress logging here where we're, you know, waiting for the workflow to complete before returning the output. And I log every 10 seconds as it's running. But now you can see the output of 4 squared is 16. And what I really like about this is like now you can easily just like use this value in your notebook, do whatever you want, square it again. But it allows for like an interactive kind of computing where you're running these on Flyte, retrieving their outputs, and getting them right back to the scientists to do their additional work. And sometimes you may have a workflow that takes some custom input. So let me just show you this custom input where a lot of people use like data class JSON to create, you know, a config to start their workflow. And you may think that may be like challenging to get from, you know, Flyte Remote and to handle the config properly, and how do you do that all in notebooks? But it's actually really nice because, you know, that config has a schema associated with it. So I can show you what Pydantic does to try and validate that schema. But if you just pass, you know, an empty dict to this, it'll tell you that this config class, you know, is missing list of ints and weight, which if we go back to here, that's exactly what this like schema looks like, right? Like it has 2 fields required, list of ints and weight. So if we actually provide those correctly, that's when, you know, the workflow validation succeeds, and I can actually execute this workflow on Flyte. So we can again, you know, see on the Flyte console that this is working. We're, you know, it's view all the inputs and outs, but the config looks pretty legit. Flyte's doing all the fancy stuff behind the scenes to handle those complex inputs, and they can get increasingly complex. And what's really cool about this is like you can launch workflows with inputs that are specific to that project outside of that project because you're just using a schema. So like you don't need any of like the dependencies of that project to launch. So that could be really nice for task reuse where you want to keep your environment really small, but still allow for like some really cool complex inputs. That workflow, all it did was like take a list of ints and multiply them by weight. So you can see the output is just multiplied by weight. Flyte runs pretty quick. So we're, you know, running this on Kubernetes and it's actually a local kind cluster. So that's kind of what's going on here. And then you can also, let me just show you like we have this get file length workflow also. So if I do like get file length, this just, takes a Flyte file and returns the number of lines in that Flyte file. So very simple workflow. So if I show you what get file length looks like, we can again see the doc string input file is of, FlyteKit types Flyte file, but it also can be a path string or path lib. That's something that I had to like add so that like, Pydantic would be happy with any kind of type that Flyte would take. And then for workflow parameters, you can see we just have input file, which can be a remote or local file. And then the output will just be the number of lines in the file. So what I can do here is just, oh geez, sorry, too many keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to run this with the input file as, this demo file, because I think that would be fun. And what this will do is take that local file and actually, upload it to a could be ephemeral location, whatever you want to do. And it'll use that as the input. So we can still see that Flyte console is chugging away, getting the file length, which I'm going to print here when it's finished. So it should take, another 5 or 10 seconds and we'll have it. So yeah, the file length is 479. So really cool way to do interactive compute. And I'm happy to show you like how this code works behind the scenes. But it does have like some limitations. So FlyteKit, sorry, chat is blowing up and I have not, did it upload using Flyte script upload system? It just passed a string path to remote and remote did the uploading. So yes, I think.
Okay, yeah, that's the same net. Cool.
Cool. So there are some caveats that like not all types are supported at present. So if you want to do something crazy like pass a data frame into an input workflow, we'd have to like explicitly encode like cases for that and some other complex types, unless we start representing the types with like formal Python types in Flyte IDL somehow, which that's probably beyond my area of expertise. I don't really know. Someone can comment on it, but I can just show you what happens. Like if you try and run a workflow that takes a data frame, like Flyte actually represents data frames as structured data set. So we're not actually able to like run this with data frame unless we were to do some fancy transformations before hitting it with or before sending it off to Flyte remote. But I think Flyte remote would have this same issue if you tried to submit it. I'm not entirely sure, but this is an issue that we could work around. Keaton, you had a question?
Not a question. I think you can do the transformation because structured data set can automatically form the right data frame type. You might need
so this
code
might just be a Pydantic thing that needs to be changed.
Yeah, just basically adding some special marshaller or unmarshaller for Pydantic when data.
I mean, we could try it live, or we could always do it.
Yeah, we can try later, but maybe it's possible. Is Yi around? I think he might know more. He's around.
Yeah, you have a comment on that?
I think he's sleeping.
Yeah, he might be. My demo put him to sleep. Sorry, guys. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about this? Like, happy to show the code too, if that would be helpful. But like, we are just grabbing the interface from Flyte, transforming that into a Pydantic model, and that Pydantic model is ultimately what's handling all of the input validations. It also is the thing that's like putting the doc string here to like grab the doc strings from Flyte remote. So there is some work going on behind the scenes, but it's really just leveraging FlyteKit's like amazing capabilities as well as Pydantic. What's one other interesting caveat that I can show you is like if you've ever used Pydantic, you'll know that there can be some. Oh, I don't think I showed that. Like when you load a separate version, you can like load any version you want, but you can see I've like modified this compute square workflow to be an older version. And like in this case, it's saying that it wants integer to be, square as a string. But if you look at like the latest compute square, it's taking the value as an integer. So, and it's, an integer to square. value string. So like all of this is like always querying Flyte remote to get all of like the source of truth. So it really is, somewhere that you can run any version. But I do want to show you one like technical detail where like this says that the value is an integer, but I can always do something crazy like this. And Pydantic, one core issue in Pydantic is it does type coercion. But like thankfully in Pydantic 2.0, which is in alpha right now, they have an ability to run it in strict, which I think we'd probably want to when we're doing stuff like this. So you can see like right now, Pydantic actually like coerced that type. So if you look at the inputs, it coerced it to an integer before actually sending it back. And I can like prove that by just doing like this dot value, and we can always just like type this and it's an integer. So type coercion's happening on Pydantic. But yeah, that's my story. I hope you all liked it, and yeah, would love to spend some time, answering any questions that you guys have. I don't know if I showed Chip and Joanna, but if you guys don't watch Picture Uppers, you should. But yeah, happy to answer anything from the community. Would love to get this into Flyte remote at some point. Yeah.
Well, that was great. Thank you, Greg. There any question? I think there are some comments in the chat. Not sure if you already addressed the question from Niels, if you implemented a Pydantic type transformer to get this to work.
Sorry, could you elaborate on that, Niels?
Yeah, I think actually Jeev answered this. So it's dynamically creating Pydantic models.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
Not, okay, because we had talked about the type transformer some time ago.
Yeah, so it creates the workflow model by like fetching the interface from remote, loops through the parameters and assigns defaults. And then with those parameters, the one interesting thing is like it has to get the Python type. Like this is where it has to guess the Python type that's associated with the interface. And this is where some like interesting things can happen, like that structured data set case. And this is where you can see like you can put some custom handling for this, where like if it's a Flyte file, I want Pydantic to be able to take a Flyte file or a string or a pathlib. So we may have to do like the same kind of things for like if it's a data frame. But there may be some better way to do this. But this is a start, and still pretty excited about kind of the usability improvements this gives people in notebooks.
Yeah, this improves the UX of Flyte remote like crazy. So we should discuss what the approach there is for upstreaming. That makes sense.
Yeah, should we keep it as a separate thing, maybe, so that the core API remains as is, just for like the extreme use case or other use cases?
It's funny because at this point, there are like two levels of abstraction, right? There's synchronous client and then there's Flyte remote. So we'll need to decide whether this is like another interface or
there is, we can always, I think getting the first thing, which would be the interface part, the async part, I think is less critical for now. Like right now, you can make this, like we do, what I have for like the retrieving of outputs is just like on execute, I have like this wait for outputs, which is a bool, which you can always just say like wait for outputs is false, and then it'll just like execute and return right away and give you the actual like execution back. So we can talk about some of my thoughts there, because I'm not sure what is better, to have something that's like a jack or all of trades and kind of have the Boolean for wait for outputs, or have the user work with their own executions. But I know for our scientists, they'd prefer like the simplest case possible to be the default, and then always allow power users to do whatever.
Yeah, because Flyte remote has the wait argument as well. I feel like the biggest value out of this is like, the log outputs, the validation, the kind of immediate feedback, and not having to read gRPC errors, as someone else pointed out above. So this is amazing work.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had one thought on that. Like basically, the synchronous Flyte client, I just want to get rid of it. I don't think that is. I know it has some other APIs, but it exists. It's most vestigial, right? With the new gRPC and protobuf stuff that we have, I think those clients themselves are pretty usable on their own. But it exists, and people have embedded them into their code bases today. Our problem today is like, some things you just can't remove because people have used them in code bases. It's not a bad thing. It's just extra maintenance, extra code. But I like this a lot because it simplifies that.
What I'd love to, like, a follow-up for this is like, you kind of like the logging right now, but I think that's like a weak point in this, and that like having an IPy widget that would show you something similar to the console with exactly what's currently happening, how many of your dynamics succeeded, failed, and everything like that is my next little fun side project idea.
And that's actually doable because Flyte console is splittable. You can pull out certain parts. It's just that, how do you...
Well, I'm doing it all with Flyte Remote, so I may need to sync with you guys and talk about what could be possible.
Authentication is another interesting hard part over there. But it's cool.
Great. But yeah, if y'all have any like follow-up questions, feel free to Slack me on the Flyte Slack. We could always talk about it. And like I said, trying to get this upstream. If you think this would be useful for your company or organization, let me know.
Hey, Greg, I had one more question on that. What do you think about actually developing sometimes some of the tasks within Jupyter and then running them directly from Jupyter? Do you think that's a valid use case? Do you guys use it?
Absolutely, because there are folks that do want to scale on Kubernetes a simple function that takes very structured inputs and scale that across 100 pods or nodes. So 100%, I think that would really be enabling, and that on top of like this like logging and everything would be an incredible UX.
Yeah. That's doable, as we discussed yesterday in the contributor channel. So
yeah, the Cloud Pickle is gonna do some great things.
Awesome. That was great. Thank you so much, Greg, and the entire Freenom team. That was really useful for the entire community.